And if you mute the speech that shakes your frail beliefs, you only seek to insulate your image and continue down the stream in the direction clout and credit steers. Directly from your mouth into am I the asshole Reddit's ears. Directly back into the greasy pockets of some Gates Foundation financiers. And then directly back into the frantic final thoughts of early crazy pockets of volunteers, staring at the numb and mumbling vacancies where recently had been their peers. Half of whom are glitching with the memory stuck on pause, and half have zero fucking clue just who they are or why they're here. It's been said that fear is all we have to fear, but that was back before the Bezos fear condenser came along, distilling concentrated fear that's diamond pure, crystal clear, oppressor strong, and woven into every single article you read and song they let you hear. And then Elon heard that Jeff enhanced our fears by 86%, and he said, hold my beer. And not a single sheep among the herd would turn their head or say a word, cause they were all too busy begging for the shears, begging for the muzzle, happy just to guzzle, feed, and watch a screen for all their years. Man, to each his own, can't afford a home, but they'll let you have your cozy little ecosphere, where there among your own devices you can break the seventh seal, overthrow the oracles, and slay the seer. All the tomes were burned and all the lips were seared. Shut your eyes and all our lives just disappear. Now blink 'em twice. Welcome to your ecosphere.
Legend says that Hercules swept Cerberus right off his feet and effortlessly set him down softly as a songbird. Atlas kept the world upon his back and every day wondered whether he could stand it any longer. And TheTaraReade came out to say the man they tried to label the messiah of morality was really just another rapist. And I don't intend to hesitate when asked who was the stronger. Tara, like Assange, knew that carrying the truth would be the hardest labor. Tara knew that her assailant wasn't gonna make us any safer, and knew he's just the type of man to hand a decent foreign leader US printed walking papers, and knew he'd be relentless and aggressive in the war he'd wage upon her very character, that his attempts to weaken and degrade and embarrass her would be her only compensation. But I strongly doubt that anyone could ever have foreseen the stream of hate that came from quote-unquote progressives and the self-styled titans of survivor advocation. So if you really think there's something to be gained out of sharing your pain with the world, you are sorely mistaken. The Biden team just dragged their feet addressing Tara's allegations. Until they had a decent list of smears, then they aired them out on every station. And it turns out no one wants to hear the truth of who they praised as being worthy of such bloated liberal celebration. That no one wants to really know the person they've so valiantly defended, even when it meant they had to gloat and shit all over someone braver than they'd be if given the occasion. Now cue the faceless comment squad invasion. Cue those fuckers crawling out the woodwork to come analyze the way you wore your hair and what you wear. Like your appearance waives your rights, or that somehow you're the reason for your situation. Somehow they've decided you should bear responsibility for what such monstrous men insist on doing. Somehow they're deluded by the empty, hypocritical, and useless fucking platitudes that bastard keeps on spewing. And I think it's very telling that the best of their excuses when they try to come and justify our president's abuses is a hearty butt Trump. In which case I'll remind you that you never saw the news attempt to sell us Donald Trump like he was morally upstanding or a decent human. But when Joe says something bigoted or ogles someone's little kid, CNN says, isn't this refreshing? Biden's like a mix of JFK and FDR with all the finer parts of Harry Truman. Christ, I know that they don't think that we're the brightest, but at least pretend we got a couple lumens. Ask yourself if you have ever questioned what they fed you, or do you just shut your eyes and then consume it? And now ask yourself if you ate every one of Biden's lies under guise of harm reduction and the promise of a slight improvement. And now imagine long ago that Biden chose to show you who he really was by traumatizing you for his amusement. Now imagine that you watched him touch a Bible with those filthy hands, and then assume the power of the highest seat in all the land, of knowing your attacker wields a global coalition born of three-letter agencies who'll make a life's mission out of trying to discredit you through lies, damn lies, and collusion. Big tech is never gonna separate from our surveillance state. Fuck's sakes, they're just a breath away from total fusion. So there will come a time where even if you see the light, your voice will never reach the sky through all the bots and all the noise pollution. So trust us when we tell you that the masking of abuses is perhaps this country's oldest institution. And I know nothing nobler than facing it in honor of the truth when you know that the people holding power have been neutralizing truth since there was wet ink on the Constitution. So know that Tara's truth is something crucial to the movement. And if you see yourself a partner to the revolution, help this country see through all the baseless propaganda through the crux of Joe's illusions. And recognize that TheTaraReade gave everything she had so she could tell us what the truth is. Recognize the decent thing to do when someone bears their soul and shows their bruises is not to ask for context or offer up your own solutions. Your job is just to listen with an honest mind and put yourself on Tara's side a moment so you understand the path she chooses. That there is no instant fame worth the dragging of your name. And if that's what you think, you've a lot to learn about the kind of facts the mob can handle and the kind that it refuses. You've a lot to learn about the news and all its many uses. Guess you've yet to learn the truth the news will serve as fruit from which they've squeezed out all the juices. And we all eat the husk and just pretend it's full of nutrients and isn't really useless. But the jaws of our ability to yield accountability are absolutely toothless. So don't you kid yourself that any lips are being loosened. They won't ever tell us where the bodies are or show us where the proof is. It's on you to recognize the lechery our president so regularly oozes. It's on you to muster up some honesty and ask yourself how Biden won your trust, but it's America that loses. Open up your eyes and learn to recognize the bruises. Open up your eyes and learn to recognize the bruises.
They'll gladly pay you by the hour for a minute or so, so you can sign off on the towers where they'll piss on your home. And if you feel like you're just powerless to answer them no, it's 'cause you are. Gladly pay you by the hour for a minute or so, so you can sign off on the towers where they'll piss on your home. And if you feel like you're just powerless to answer them no, it's 'cause you are. You are. They'll gladly stagnate a living wage, snap the chains and bury it.
Labor slaves in rusty cages dragged behind a chariot, led by Mr. Racial Jungle, Joseph R. Iscariot, fighting over scraps as they barrage us all with variants and BuzzFeed clickbait, straight until we're paralyzed, trying to distract us from the concentration camps that Joe had swore he'd close but only chose to amplify, where they got 50-something kids in cages made for 5 to occupy. And no, she hasn't seen the camps, but Harris swears they're paradise. She tells us the facilities are safe, and that right down to the women, they are regularly sterilized. Then she throws her head back and she proceeds to laugh, that sort of heartless cackle you'd expect from someone working steadfastly on behalf of the virus and a Congress full of parasites. And where was I? I was busy cashing every blue check, demonstrating plainly all the narratives expected from the verified. I was busy breeding verbal leeches by the terabyte. Train them to exsanguinate the wealthy while they sleep at night. Bleed the oil barons dry and barren. Say they showed us how to share and now we share alike. Tell them I contracted rabies from a feral mic. Now I'm just another species losing sleep to noise pollution and these glaring lights. Forced to change its habits and adapt to just survive. But now it's safe to say that some of us are thriving in the moment, throwing shit on presidential homes beneath the Paris skies. So if you feel like you're just powerless, I guess you bought the lie. But I can tell they're petrified of our collective might, 'cause I can hear those gentrifiers weeping at the sight of our collective rights. And I only can imagine the intensifying fear of knowing revolution's near. And all that's left to do is simply wallow in the thick anticipation of a rabid bite. And baby, one day you can ask your leaders just what that was like before you grab a slice. So if you think you're powerless, allow me now to change your mind. Honey, if you think you're powerless, allow me now to change your mind. See, they'll pay you hourly, tax them each apart, and build a shining tower out of loopholes and cards, and tell you that you're powerless to keep you in the dark because you aren't, because we aren't. You see, they'll pay you hourly, tax them each apart, and make you build a shining tower out of loopholes and cards, where they'll tell you that you're powerless to keep you in the dark because you aren't, because we aren't. Bomb in a manger, lily white danger. Kissinger still alive, isn't life strange? And by strange I mean irony forged into something enraging and shameful. Would you ever really want to see an angel? The hideous truth that the news won't use, 'cause it doesn't quite suit their angles. Now we the consumers are better off left in the dark, with our heads in the sand and our hands on our ankles, holding a smile at gunpoint, thanking the bankers, paving a path to a future where we're all staff on the super yacht. We're the food, we're the fuel, entertainment and anchors. So where is your anger? Where is your anger? So where is...
Welcome, everyone, to the Politics of Survival. I'm your host, TheTaraReade. How are you? Wow, we have had quite a couple of weeks. We're living in this really intense time where instead of taking care of fellow citizens, Biden administration has decided to just double down on this proxy war against Russia via Ukraine. And they're talking about $50 billion more to go towards weapons and all of that. And meanwhile, all of a sudden, catch this, 30 members of what they call the liberal Democrats decided to write a letter and say, oh, maybe we should talk about diplomacy now. Well, what I want to say to those 30 Democrats is, where were you a couple of votes ago? You were voting for weapons to go in Ukraine. Oh, but you know what? Let's wait. We're 2 weeks out from the midterms. So there you have it. So now they're trying to jump on this bandwagon and trying to give out this rhetoric like they're going to throw out there that Biden should have peace talks and diplomacy. But really, there's no accountability, right? Because who's going to hold them accountable? We have the election coming, the midterms, in a couple of weeks. And then shortly after that is when they vote on the $50 billion weapons package. So anyway, desperation Democrats, I call them. Here we go. And the Republicans are much better. The Republicans have been voting for these weapons for Ukraine as well. And so we're going to talk about all this, the failing of the duopoly, the failing of the Biden administration. And I have someone really dynamic and wonderful who's trying to do something about it. She is a mother of 3. She's a working mother, works in the healthcare industry, and is running for governor in Texas. And her name is Delilah Barrios. Welcome, Delilah. How are you?
Hi, Tara. Thank you for having me. I'm well. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm feeling feisty because I don't want to have a nuclear war.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you're here. And I'm glad you're running on the Green Party ticket. Is that correct?
That's right.
All right.
Yes.
So let's dive right in. What prompted you, because we weren't this close to nuclear war when you started, I think, entering the race, but what prompted you to run for office and to be, because you have a full-time job and a partner and 3 children and a very full life. And so what led you to where you're at, and tell us a little bit more about your Green Party candidacy and all of that.
Okay. Yeah. So I think the pandemic, honestly, being a healthcare worker, when that hit was really challenging. And I think a lot of us went through, I think everybody kind of went through it in different stages of uncomfortable to grief, and so the 2020 election absolutely just made me, demoralized me as a person, as a voter, as an activist too. I was just so frustrated. And I thought,
blue, no matter who rapes you, right? That was the
exactly. No, yeah, I think so. I remember, and I was honestly really trying to be as supportive as I could of you, because what hypocrites? Oh, we're here to be, women's rights champions, but also, and so, obviously I didn't have a lot of faith in the electoral process. And, I thought it really takes a lot of strength and integrity to challenge that. And, so I felt inspired to run. And I think Angela Walker was the vice president candidate for 2020 on the Green Party ticket. And I really just loved her. I thought, what a really humble, beautiful, sweet person. And she was very likable, very down to earth. And I thought, this is what we're missing a lot of the time, is we want these prepped and polished people telling you exactly what you want to hear. And there's no, like you were saying, no accountability with that kind of those kind of false promises. So yeah, just struggling through that. And then, with the climate change and with everything going on in the world, I knew that I didn't want to get desensitized, and so that was going to require a bit more ambition for me to do it, you know.
Right, right. Well, I mean, I think it's inspiring that you're running for governor, because that's, I mean, it's Texas and it's tough, but you tell us a little bit more about your district and the concerns that the people have in your area of the world and what's going on, and how basically the duopoly is not serving the working people there. Because you and I kind of talked a little bit about that in the past, but our audience, I'm sure, would love to hear, what you're offering and what's going on.
Well, I mean, obviously, one of the biggest issues is that we don't have reproductive freedom and reproductive rights. And so being a woman in the state is it's very painful, to know that you do not have all and final say over your healthcare. And that's a problem. And we lost our rights under a Democratic president. So it's not like they can say, "Oh, we protect you." Oh, it's something that they wave over people's heads all the time.
Oh,
so
well,
reproductive
wait,
rights is a big
Delilah.
issue.
Wait a second,
That?
Delilah. Joe Biden said the other day that if you vote Democrat, you get to have Roe v. Wade codified. You don't believe
Right.
that,
As if he probably even knows
Right.
what that means.
Yeah.
Or
No, I know.
yeah, I often
Right.
I mean, I live in a state where there's a lot of bigotry, and I'm like, none of these people know anything about reproductive health. They couldn't
Right.
tell you what organs are what. They have no idea, and it's so frustrating, working in the medical field, having these bigots try and tell me what I can and can't do with my own body. And two of my children are girls, and I talk to them freely about these things because we have a very open informational household. So and they're just like my daughter. She just turned 16 and she's just so frustrated, that this is something that we're having a conversation about. We're just completely lacking morals and ethics in the conversations about elections and people's rights. So that is a top issue. Also, criminal justice reform. We still have people going to prison for simple offenses like non-violent offenses. So the legal recreational cannabis is on our platform too. We have UBI, Medicare for all, statewide single payer, $20 an hour minimum wage. And honestly, I don't even know if that's enough, but that's just what people in the service industry were telling me. They're like, if I made $20 an hour, my life would be easier. I could probably afford, to live somewhere independently. And that's changing so rapidly. So housing is also a fear and concern. It's just,
how many unhoused people do you have in your district? I think, today Ron Placone, this comedian, but he makes political statements he was talking about California. Now they have a super majority for Democrats, but they do not have access to affordable healthcare. They do not have an affordable minimum wage. They do not have, in fact, the housing. Right now, 70,000 people are homeless in Los Angeles alone. I don't even know what the San Francisco statistics are, but it's a crisis. So what are you seeing in your district? Are you dealing with houselessness and just, rents are up nationwide 20%? Where are you with the working folks dealing with that?
I mean, I gotta tell you, I've worked with general surgeons who were like, it's too expensive to live here. I have to move.
Surgeons
and I'm just like,
money,
wow, we are pricing out our, the people that we need. Yes. So
they make like $500,000 a year, don't they?
I think it's a little bit less in Texas, but
it's a lot.
I think they make decent wages. But that's kind of where the situation is. I live close to Austin, and so there's a houseless population problem. But ever since I think I moved when I was like 11 to that area, and there's always, from what I remember, been people living on the streets, and it's just like, people kind of explained it to me like, oh, these bigger cities, it's always going to be a problem. And it's like, we just had that winter storm last winter. And, people actually died from being exposed to the elements. And, it's like, it's not even, I don't know. We have a lot of fear mongering about socialism, and things like that. And it's just a lot of like misinformation and people being, purposefully uneducated in regards to policies. So there's so many issues. We have a lot of houseless people, and obviously we have a lot of uninsured and people that don't have health care and basic healthcare needs. They don't have access to water, or they don't have access to bathrooms. So it's not great. So, Texas is very rural too.
Yeah. So speaking of all this, there's an infrastructure. So you have your state budget that's not really dealing with it, but you also have your federal budget that could be and is not. So those are your federal legislators. And I guess what I wanted to ask you about was this proxy war that the US is fighting against Russia via Ukraine. You've seen the rhetoric, you're part of the Green Party. So, Jill Stein's been labeled a Russian asset. The Green Party stance is anti-war and that we shouldn't be sending weapons to Ukraine. There should be diplomacy. Minsk II Accord should have been abided by. Ukraine should be neutral. NATO should stop pushing up on, the borders. And in fact, NATO should be abolished altogether. But what? I mean, we're feeling it as working folks in the United States. In your district, are people starting to have these conversations like, wait a second, another $50 billion to Ukraine? Hold up, or what are you hearing?
Yeah, no, that is actually a very common discussion for regular working class people. They're like, wait, I can't afford, they, especially with Abbott, they're like, oh, in the summer months, you're going to have to, make sure your thermostat's not too low, yada, 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 save electricity. And people are like, wait a minute, how come we have all these businesses open all night? Like the lights are on, nobody's there. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. People are talking about the war in Ukraine, and they're talking about, how much is going over there, and also asking questions like, why are we over there? What does NATO actually do? And, that is helpful to hear, because I think people are asking the right questions, and it means that they're starting to at least think critically, which is super important for any anti-war efforts. I think a lot of people are frustrated because they see inflation, they see how expensive things are, and they're like, how come we're sending billions elsewhere? How come we have people sleeping on the streets? How come our kids don't have free lunches? Things like that. So obviously I speak to a lot of parents. Those are their concerns.
Are any of the governors in the US, are you hearing of any of them pushing back on the spending? Because of course this directly affects their state budgets. Their state budgets get smaller. Governors are receive federal funding for different categories. One of them, of course, being disaster relief, which your area needed from FEMA and whatnot and other things. But what are you hearing any pushback from the governor's office about Ukraine, or any of the governors that, you're kind of, because you're running in that race and those state races?
No, I feel like I'm the only one saying these things and advocating for peace talks and advocating to, abolish NATO. I don't think anybody else is trying to have those conversations. I think they're still focusing on fear mongering, and the duopoly is just pushing that rhetoric that, it's either pick lesser evil. They're both crises that you're going to be exposed to. They're not talking about climate change. They're not talking about inequality, anything like that. So, and if they've talked about it, I just haven't missed it. But every time they're in the news, it's just like, oh, they raised so many millions of dollars, and this person pulled a stunt on this person. It's really feels very immature. I'll be honest.
Well, I mean, and that's translating into the lack of diplomacy, right? Because the emotional intelligence is not there. Well, we have weapons, nuclear weapons. And now we're going from this enemy that we've created of Russia, right? This proxy war we're fighting there. Now we're amping it up with China. In fact, Garland was just on the news today talking about the threat from China, and they're arresting people that had sort of some collusion with the Chinese government or whatever. But and that rhetoric is amping up about China. So are we really in a place to take on two major nuclear powers in the world? What is
I mean, we're not even in a place to house and clothe and feed people. So no, we're not. It's just so. No, and I think it's a bit hypocritical for us to be, considering ourselves on moral high ground in this
Right.
country in the first place.
So I have another question for you. You've seen a lot with AOC and with the squad, and they made a lot of noise when Trump was president about the border. And I know that's a huge concern for folks in Texas, particularly in your district and south of your district, of course. But like where you'll be, dealing with the whole state. So that's a very big topic, right? Is immigration and the wall and all of that, and the environmental impacts that the wall is having, et cetera. But what has been the frequency of the Biden administration even going down to these centers? And what about immigration? What are you hearing from your constituents? And what is the message they want to get through by voting for you?
I would say our supporters are very sympathetic to refugees and people who are fleeing colonialism and imperialism. Mm-hmm. So, we just, that's the bar, you have to at least be sympathetic to people's suffering. And most of our supporters do not support caging people for profit. That's a disgrace to our human nature. So that's where we are. As far as people, because I talk to people of all political backgrounds. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think I hear a little bit of the propaganda coming through. And, when we have these conversations, I just try to ask people to think critically, like, do you support people dying needlessly to violence? And do you support, us spending all this money to cage people and, force women to undergo hysterectomies without their consent and separate children from their families and basically treat people worse than animals? And they're like, well, no, I don't support that. And I'm like, well, if you don't support immigration reform, then you do support those things. And that's kind of, some people are like, a lot of it is fear. They're not sure what that means for them. They're worried about their own financial health and well-being. And to an extent, I do understand that, but the conversations we have are really more or less like getting to the roots of that. You're a humanitarian. You know what I mean? You don't really want people to suffer like that. So it is hard because those conversations are not comfortable. And, it's important though.
So have you seen AOC down at the border? Like she was crying tears not too long ago, and some other representatives from the Biden administration, have they been frequenting Texas at all or no? Or?
No, I think AOC came down a few months ago and met a heckler. And, because, consistently they are voting for war. Consistently, if it's not Ukraine and NATO, it's Israel, or, there's all these talks.
Afghanistan.
Right. And so that's, a big area of our platform as Greens is defunding the military. And obviously in Texas, the prison industrial complex is so massive in the state. So that's a lot of, I just see it as wasted resources. We're not taking any kind of approach towards making our community safer with all these prisons, people who, what I mean? It's not an improvement. So
yeah, Maria Butina was on my show. I don't know if you had a chance to see that, but she was visiting and of course was accused of being a spy. She pled guilty because she couldn't get a fair trial, but it was on a technicality that she was imprisoned, and they put her in solitary for months, and she was not a threat. But she discussed the prison conditions, and she discussed how it changed her view, her worldview. Mm-hmm. She was kind of a conservative Republican, and she had kind of connected with them while she was in the US. And then she became actually in prison. She said that she got socialist ideas. And also she noticed that all of the prisoners besides herself were Black and brown. They, she was Russian, right. So she was an exception. And she said that the racism was unbelievable, and the abuses, and she wrote a book about it, which she's trying to get over here, but it's hard because we censor everything from Russia. So
yeah,
she talked about the prison industrial complex. And doesn't Texas have the highest amount besides California prisons? Am I right statistically?
Yeah, statistically, we are definitely one of the, if not the top at least one of the top three as far as caging people, because it's not just the prison. I mean, ICE is an extension of that arm. And so we've got a lot of people that have been taken by immigration and caged that way completely. All of these people are presumably innocent and legally seeking refuge here and being caught up in this for-profit caging system. So yeah, it's pretty bad. I think again, I most people that I talk to are just, they're worried about how they're gonna feed their family. They're worried about, how they're gonna get to work and not having to worry about getting into an accident, where they can't pay their bills. But being in Green Party and being among leftist circles and people who are, socialists and people who, care about others, it's one of those issues where it's like, we have to start somewhere, like it's such a big, massive problem at this point. Again, they're a waste of resources. And as a person who's concerned with sustainability, you think about all of the, like the waste involved in materials and hiring all the staff, and just it's like a self-serving machine, and it only churns out pain and misery, and any other description of it is very untruthful. So
well, I mean, I think people would push back because crime has risen, right? And that there's statistically, it has risen in the United States, violent crime right now. And I think it speaks more to economic disparity and desperation than anything. But one of the things that Biden did was he actually, when I was working for him, it was in the works, was the crime bill.
Right.
And that crime bill resulted in statistically incarcerating, so many people, mostly Black and brown, and his argument for it, he even used, horrendous phrases like jungle. And, he was very racist in his language. But what are you seeing any rhetoric change, or how can you, okay, let me rephrase that. How can you bring together people that are saying, hey, look, I'm scared, I'm seeing some violent crime, I'm seeing robberies or home invasions or like other violent crimes, sexual assault, whatever it is. How do we have a balanced approach to where there's consequences, but not necessarily just mass incarcerations?
Yeah, and I don't know if I fully answered your question last time, but I have not seen the Biden administration in Texas except for after the Uvalde massacre. That was the only time that I know that he's been in this state. So yeah, I know that a lot of statistics, it really just feels like the media narrative is there's a crime wave and the agenda seems to be to fund the police and fund the prison industrial complex more. And, scientifically, those things don't make safer communities. So, the people, I don't really hear a lot of families, parents concerned with crime. That's not something, again, they're really worried about. I know some, more reactionary people who are just, paranoid, really. And to an extent, I do understand, because we do have a high population of unhoused people. We do have a high population of people that have mental illness that are untreated, and you know what I mean. So those things can really impact communities, and I do understand that. But again, like, you think about statistically, these policies that the progressives are pushing are unhelpful for tackling the problem. If you're worried about crime, you invest in housing and education. You don't fund the police more. They already have usually half or more of most municipalities' budgets. And so, you got to think like, okay, maybe if we had more after school programs, maybe if kids weren't hungry throughout the school day, things like that. It's systemic issues that we need to worry about, not, whatever the media narrative is.
Fair enough. And then I one thing that came up that I've seen some people approach me, I used to work as a domestic violence advocate, and I believe, there was a lot of incarceration around DV, and it didn't help. In the 20 years that I was doing that work, either as a volunteer or staff somewhere, the statistics got worse, not better. Incarcerating people isn't always the answer. So we need a holistic wraparound services to kind of address that issue is kind of my take on it. But how that looks is really up to communities and not necessarily the federal government, right? That would be up to more state or local people to figure out, okay, let's address this. But one thing that's come up about Texas several times in my work in the past has been missing and exploited Indigenous women and human sexual trafficking on the border and that kind of thing. Are you familiar with that issue? And have you been approached by any of the, the nonprofits or there's small things trying to get more attention? Because a lot of times you'll see things like the Gabby Petito case, which, it was a horrendous case. Glad it got publicity, but there are a lot of Indigenous women who are missing and the cases don't get any publicity at all. So could you give me some thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's definitely a concern. And I actually went to a demonstration earlier this month. I carried a red dress in remembrance of missing murdered Indigenous women, to bring eyes to the issue, that our women are being taken and they're being abused and many of them are being murdered. And, a lot of it, and it's not just near reservations, it's all over. It's a systemic issue. A lot of people in Texas are, they would identify as Indigenous, even though they may or may not be detribalized. Like they still have those cultural aspects and have grown up with those teachings. So it is something we talk about a lot within our communities, and it does bring a distrust of police and a distrust of the criminal justice system, because they're obviously failing a lot of people, and we do, as a medical worker, we've had to have training on traffic victims, because we have an obligation medically, if they're in our care, to prevent violence for them. And so a lot of people have had to have the training about what kind of signs to look for, and how can you offer help to these people. And again, even with all of the education, we're still not helping everybody. That's still a problem. And I think we have Amber Alerts like at least several times a week, where I live, and it's often children.
I can't remember the last Amber Alert. I live on the West Coast. Like I can't, like if it was a few months ago. Tell me more about that. What every week you have an Amber Alert almost?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Often, again, with like domestic violence, I'm not, it could be related. Often, most of the time they find them, right? Like, oh, it was a relative. They had a dispute. Somebody took custody without talking about it. But some of them are actually not found. And we have a lot of missing kids too, in the state. And, there's a lot of kids living under the poverty line, which makes them more susceptible to being trafficked or victims of that. So it is I would consider that also a human rights crisis that we're dealing with.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, you've taught me a lot about that area. I had heard some things, particularly about the human sexual trafficking. On the West Coast, they call it the I-5 corridor, the same problem near Los Angeles, and California. And then also up north to Seattle, there's another human trafficking corridor, human sexual trafficking. And Eliza Blue actually does a lot of really good advocacy work trying to get awareness out. A lot of the nonprofits, unfortunately, I've been disappointed in. They end up just kind of swallowing the profits and not really doing their jobs. Right. But there are a few, usually it's grassroots that are really dedicated and trying to do good work. But I wanted to ask you, as far as fuckery that happens around when you're a Green Party candidate trying to get on the ballot and whatnot. Matthew Ho was on my show, and as you know, he had to take his case to court because the Democrats were doing all kinds of crazy things. Besides keeping him off the ballot, they were posing as Green Party members when they were calling people and about these petitions. So could you talk a little bit about your experience running and what's going on, what we're hearing about?
Yeah, so I actually know Matthew, like we talk sometimes. He's he's a great guy. But right, we've got our own issues. It was in 2020 that they tried to sue Greens off the ballot here in Texas, and the courts ruled in, Green, third parties' favor. And I think the way it was explained to me is that the Libertarians and the Greens were having to work together for the ballot access and to fight, getting kicked off, because if they're going to kick Greens off, they're going to come, it's basically sets a precedent to get rid of all third parties. So
right,
we had a, mutual
independence,
consideration there. Yeah. But, it's like we're decentralized. So a lot of the things that I do, like I have a small group of volunteers. So often, we're doing our own thing and we're trying to interact with the public, and like the state party's handling, some of the other concerns that we have to deal with, legal updates and things like that. I did, for me, like I get a lot of like hate mail because people think, because I support abortion rights, I'm a terrible person. So like we get that. And then as far as Democratic issues and fuckery, it's really just like a cult mindset about, you're the enemy. Like that's the way we're framed here, right? Like, and I'm like, oh, so what happened to Medicare for all? And nobody has anything to say about it, So that's kind of more or less like, it's just like more culture war.
So you're not having the same tactics being used in that aggressive way.
No, I think it's also because our state is so big and spread out, like it's already hard to organize here. I can tell you that from my own experience. So yeah, I don't think that they're going to consolidate their efforts for this race, because they know that, the incumbent and the other guy are wealthy and they're, they've got a lot of name recognition. So I think they see us as small potatoes.
What about the debate stage? How, could you tell our audience how hard it is to get on a debate stage? Because it educated me, because it's always been a bit hard, but now they're making it quite impossible.
So the threshold was $50,000 to be able to debate on stage. So obviously it was just the two millionaire candidates that got invited. And the fun thing is I was born in Brownsville, Texas. So it's called Rio Grande Valley. That's where I'm from. And that's where they held their debates. They did a lot of organizing down there, trying to secure votes, because they see, Latino people as a monolith, and they want to pander to the base. And yeah, I think it's really interesting to see, it not working. Because most people I talk to are like, oh, thank God you're running. I didn't know. I'll vote now.
Oh yeah, because people just won't vote at all. Yeah, that's where people are at. Yeah. Well, that's good to hear that you're encouraging some people to at least get, I have some friends and colleagues that are just like done with the electoral system. So, hearing you say that you're going to try to make some changes and are really trying to stick by the values is refreshing, because, people really threw their hat in, they threw in their last few dollars in for Bernie Sanders and for AOC. And it's just like, they've just been voting for a war, right? And and not helping working people and all the things they promised. Not one single one of those promises, even though they have the majority, not one has come true. So I think people are in a real, they're either angry or apathetic or both. And so it must be a tough midterm. Those coffee meetups must be something.
Oh my God. Yeah, I can tell, some of the conversations we had at work. Some of the conversations that we've had, have just been in the grocery store. Like it's just one of those things. I think, and that's also too why I felt really important. Like I don't want to be a non-voter. I don't want to be apathetic to what's happening. And as an activist, I really felt like we weren't able to get things done. Okay. There's not
Mm-hmm.
enough money backing us. And
Mm-hmm.
I've been in courtrooms trying to fight for water rights and, reject pipeline expansions, things like that. And it doesn't matter how much the public rejects these things. The pro-corporate politicians are gonna always stab people in the back because they're not
Right.
invested in people's material conditions getting better. They're not invested in our schools and our communities and our water quality. So I really hope to empower more people to, I'm always supportive of direct action and mutual aid. I try to, I've been helping as much as I can for as long as I have been able to. My kids and I, we always went to protests and we, wrote letters and things like that. It's set up to make sure that people that are poor and working class aren't represented. And we need to fight back for that. So I understand the apathy, but I can't relate to that decision. I'm too stubborn.
There you go. Understood. Fair enough. So Reef is with us, and I want to give a big shout out to Independent News Network, which you can find on Twitter and social media. And they were kind enough to lift up the tech part of my podcast and get my name out there. So thank you, Indy and Reef for doing the engineering. I really appreciate INN, and we're kind of a ragtag group of content creators with all different ideas and views, but we are able to be seen and heard because of their hard work. So thank you. And nobody gets a ton of cash for it. We do it for the love, I guess. Right. Right, Reef. So Reef, do you have any questions that have come up from the live audience for Delilah?
Yeah.
Questions or comments?
I got one.
Okay, great.
The Big Show Jesse asks, $20 an hour. How are small businesses supposed to sustain that without inflating prices? That's one of the questions.
With the statewide single payer healthcare,
that would also
we'll be
help.
saving people a lot of money. Yeah.
But otherwise,
also, just real quick.
Go ahead.
As far as budgets go, our federal budget we spend a lot of money via fossil fuel subsidies. Basically, our communities are paying, federal taxes to have their communities being poisoned. So we need to do something about that. That's a lot of money to be working with. There's plenty to go around, It's the oil tycoons that always have their sticky hands out asking for free money. And that's, that belongs to the people. These are our resources. So we need to make sure that we have access to them, not just access, but they're ours, they're owned publicly.
So you're saying more infrastructure and money for small business owners. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And I really want to, Texas is one of the last strongholds as far as private land. Like, suck it, Bill Gates.
Bill Gates hasn't bought up swaths of the farmland here.
I'm sure he's been trying, but again, stubborn, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of people, and I really want to help farmers. That's also another reason why the legal recreational cannabis is on our platform. We need to, and that's why UBI is on our platform too, because we need to make sure that everybody's not living and suffering below these poverty lines that aren't really representative of what income does for people anymore anyway. So there's just a lot of restructuring that needs to happen, but it's because we don't spend our resources wisely that we're in so many problems, like we're in so much trouble.
Okay. So Reef, do you have any more questions or comments for Delilah? Okay. No, not right now. Okay. Well, I'm going to ask my audience, if you do, now would be the time to type that, and Reef will make sure to get your voice heard. And let's talk about ways that you can contact, because I know people from Texas that might be listening and watching and might watch the replay. How do they find you? How do they support you? Can you, we have some of it in our, the links below, but if you don't mind, just kind of talking about that a minute.
Yeah. So the website is Delilah for Texas fullspelling.com. And we have, it's mostly social media that you're going to be able to catch us. I've got, like I said, we have a small group of volunteers, and we try to when people who are reaching out via Facebook or Instagram or whatever, we try to make sure that we're addressing that. I just did an interview with a college kid from Llano High School over the weekend, and he got like an award for being good and doing community service. And it was just like, I was like, one of my volunteers was like, hey, like flagged me down, was like, you should reach out to this person. Because, you know, sometimes, like I said, like we don't have a big budget. So we sometimes we miss people. And I don't mean that at all. I really want to talk to as many people as I can. But yeah, it's usually through our socials that you'll be able to catch us: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. It's usually Delilah for Texas is the handle. And you know, we do, yeah, that's us on Twitter. And then yeah, we've got Facebook. So Messenger is a tool that we can use, and we have an email set up, but that's the one that's hard to manage. Like that's the one that's harder to manage. But yeah, just reach out to us via social media, and then we go and we hand out like flyers, you know, at college campuses and stuff like that. So I just try to hopefully run into people or get the word out, like, you know, just tell your friends what's going on, and you know, make yourself heard. What are your issues? What are the things you care about? I'm pretty sure we have something that we can use to address, you know, your concerns in our platform.
You know, Delilah, I'll share a story with you because I was a campaign operative for a few years for Democrats. Unfortunately, I have changed my ways, but one of the things when I was a field manager, one campaign, we did not have a lot of name recognition with the person that I was helping. And so we were on kind of in a college town. So we put flyers in pizza boxes, and we made a deal with, and one of the several, actually there was 2 or 3 volunteers that actually for the campaign that actually worked at the pizza place, and we got permission from the owner to put the flyers about the candidate just so they could see their platform and their information into the pizza boxes, and it went out, and it was legal, and it was okay, it was cleared. You have to clear that stuff, but creative ways of reaching out when you don't have a ton of money, like pizza. University like, awesome. I mean, I don't know, like, yeah. So, and it did actually help. Surprisingly.
That's the thing.
So like little things like that we would dream up, you know. You just have to make sure, you know, that it's legal. That's the only thing.
I know anything would get us kicked off. I will say, you know, I don't always have like a camera crew or people there to document like the things that we do, but the people that I talked to, that like they know, you know what I'm saying? Like every person that I've talked to is like, I can tell you care, and I'm going to vote for you. I don't even like voting. And you know what I mean? And it's like, maybe we can't publicize that, but that's impactful too, you know? And yeah, we try our best to just make sure we're still following the rules. But yeah, we don't have millions of dollars to spend. And the thing that I really want to change as far as politics go in the state is people are tired of people coming to their towns and asking them for money and then abandoning them and not thinking twice about enacting policies that harm them actively. So, you know, we try to give back whatever we get as much as possible because, you know, I'm a worker too. I know what it's like. And we really want people to feel empowered and not just seen and heard, but respected.
Well, I know you're in the final crunch here, and you've got the what they call the GOTV, or the Get Out the Vote. And I know midterms are notoriously difficult, but you address that. So it sounds like you have some good tactics to, you know, to get out there and get heard a bit on a smaller budget. But you know, so those college radio stations and local press, I hope they pick up your message and broadcast it and get it out there. And good luck to you as you move forward. Do you want to, before we wrap up, do you want to leave any parting thoughts with people that might be watching from Texas that or a message just in general for people that might be even thinking about running for office? Anything like that you want to share with audience?
No, I think I'm glad that you asked, because I know when we talked earlier, I mentioned that I'm a survivor too. And I think that, you know, a lot of people are timid and they're scared to make that leap of getting into the public space. And I do understand that. And I know that it's hard to have that sense of security disrupted. But I only want to let people know that at this moment, our security is being disrupted at an alarming rate. And so I would urge people to be more involved. If it's not through politics, whatever you can do for your community, everybody is capable of helping. You don't have to be capable of doing several hard, long hours in a day to make a difference to somebody. And I just want to encourage people to do more of that, because it's really the small acts of kindness and the things that we do to help each other along the way that makes more of a difference than how we present ourselves or what buzzwords we're using. So yeah, just know that I understand where you're coming from, and I'm here to support you too.
Well, that's really wonderful. All right, audience, thank you so much. There you have it, Delilah Barrios. Please check out her website, and she is all over social media, Instagram, Twitter, and you can look below the links and see all the ways that you can contact her. A big shout out to Indy and to Reade. Thank you again for making this show possible. And we have some interesting shows to come in the future as well, so stay tuned. I have a guest that's going to be coming who can talk a little bit more about this proxy war the U.S. is fighting against Russia via Ukraine and give a really unique perspective. So in the meantime, audience, look for more. Subscribe, like, if you're watching this, independent content creators need your help. I need your help. So please subscribe, like, watch, help me get there, help me get monetized. I think I'm like a few hundred hours away from actually being monetized on YouTube. Of course, then they might take me down again, but you never know. I know, right, Delilah?
We need your voice though.
So, and I'm going to be here still being strong. Check out the Glenn Beck interview I just did. I have another big interview coming. I can't give you any details, but you'll see it when it's out. And I just want to share, I know everyone's, the feds are talking about a recession coming. Things are already hard. So when you see people like Delilah stepping up and stepping out there, trying to make change, support them and put your political bubble aside, listen to what they have to say, check it out, and move past all the rhetoric, because the duopoly, it's not working. No. So anyway, that's it for tonight. There you have it. We'll see you next time. Good night.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad I got to be on here. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Delilah.
And thanks, Indy and Reade.
Thank you.